This is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom show, the wake-up call on WCOM LP, Chapel Hill and Carver, 103.5 on your FM dial, or live streaming at WCOMFM.org. You can also watch the show on the People's Channel after a week's delay on Thursday night at 10 p.m., Friday morning at 6 a.m., or Tuesday at noon. The show will also be available on our YouTube channel, Wilf Wake Up Call. I'm Iris Schwinzer here with our host, Lori Hoyt, Emily O'Hara on the camera, and today our special guest is Ruth Zalph.
Thank you, Iris. We're here for on another beautiful spring afternoon after yesterday, cold afternoon. This is so delightful, and we have a very delightful guest that we're very happy to have, Wilf's sister and dear friend, Ruth Zalph. So, welcome, Ruth.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
Ruth has been a staunch activist for how many years? A lifetime?
Almost a lifetime. Probably at least the last 45
years. And Ruth has been with Wilf many years, and also with the Raging Grannies, and has also been very involved with the Poor People's Campaign.
Yes.
And so that's what we're going to be talking about, your involvement with them and your commitment to them, and getting arrested with them. So start telling us what got you involved with the Poor People's Campaign.
Well, I've always been very interested in racism and poverty in this country. And so it was very easy for me to get involved with the Poor People's Campaign even before it was called the Poor People's Campaign, back in the years of going to the state legislature. So the point of my being here today was to talk about my arrest as a result of being at the state legislature.
So when did this happen, Ruth?
I was arrested on May 21st, 2018, in front of Senate President Phil Berger's office. And I was executing my North Carolina Section 12 constitutional right to assemble together, to consult for the common good, to instruct my representatives, and to apply to the General Assembly for redress of grievances. Well, they weren't too happy to see me or the many, many other people who were there.
So this was a protest with several people.
A lot of people. A lot
Okay.
of people were there. And we stood in front of Phil Berger's office, and some people stood in front of a different representative's office. And the sergeant of arms just stood there with his badge on his chest, and he would not allow me or anyone else to go into the office to consult with Senator Berger or any staff member. My issue was systemic racism and voting rights, and the legislature's actions restricting black people from voting. And I was not going to leave my space there. I was going to stand there, and when people started chanting, I was chanting. When people sang, I sang. And I would not leave. I believe that racism is immoral, and it tears at the very fabric of our democracy, and we've got to resist it every time at all costs. So my message to the most powerful senator was, and all I wanted to say to him was that I have rights and privileges awarded me every day of my life, not on the basis of any of my achievements, but strictly by the color of my skin. And that I would resist until everybody, regardless of the color of their skin or the sexual preferences, have the very same rights that I have. And that civil disobedience to North Carolina law is civil obedience to my God.
Now, Ruth, it seems to me you just read this section of the Constitution, the North Carolina Constitution, that said that you had a right to be there, and you've just been telling us about your deeply held moral beliefs. Why would that be civil disobedience if you have a right to be there?
Very good question indeed. Yes, well, if I were allowed, or if anyone were allowed in Senator Berger's office, then we would have left peacefully and no one would have been arrested. But that was not the idea of Senator Berger or any of his staff, because the sergeant of arms said, "I'm sorry, Senator Berger's not here." And then we said, "Well, what about somebody from his staff?" "Well, they're afraid to have anybody come in the office." Afraid of us? We believe in civil disobedience. We do not believe in violence. We are a non-violent group of people. That didn't mean a thing to them. They really did not care what we had to say. All they wanted to do was get us out of there. So in short order, after about, I don't know how long, maybe we were there an hour or more, and no one was allowed in to speak with anyone in the office. They called the police, and they gave us 3 warnings. If you do not leave now, you will be arrested. And then in a minute or 2 later, they gave us another warning, and then a 3rd warning. There were some people who did leave. They had children with them. There were reasons for them to need to leave. But there were many of us who stayed, perhaps 20 people who stayed. And the police came. They put handcuffs on us behind our back. And they took us down to the paddy wagons and then out to Wake County Jail.
Well, you know what's shocking about this is, I understand if the representative or a senator is not there, but usually they have staff there, and usually they are, because after all, you're citizens wanting to talk to your representative, and I'm kind of shocked that the staff was saying they were afraid of the citizens who are there to talk to the representative. So the whole thing that causes civil disobedience is because the staff would not talk to citizens who wanted to give their message, and therefore, since you didn't leave, so the disobedient part was not leaving. Right. Because you were not satisfied, because you were not getting your rights met to
Right.
be able to give your message or have it given by staff to Senator Berger. So then 20 of you are arrested at one time.
About 20.
Wow.
But that was not a date of a trial. What came up later were many delays between May 21st and February the 4th. And that's when the story becomes a great deal more interesting.
Okay.
Because I was in the courtroom with quite a few other people, and their cases were taken care of. And there was a gentleman there who came from the outskirts of Charlotte, and he was arrested, and he was going to do what I planned to do as well, and plead guilty. And so what happened was, my attorney said that I plead guilty and seek active jail time. And the judge looked at me and realized I'm not a youngster, and he said, I have never in my 4 decades of being a judge here sent anybody to jail for second-degree trespassing.
That's what the charge was.
That's what the charge was.
And I just want to back up 1 minute. Your attorney, this was an agreement between you and your attorney that you didn't want to just take community service, that you wanted to push it to go to jail.
Yes, I believe that when Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy took jail time, they did that for a very important reason, to bring other people around to seeing what they were doing and have a shift in power from the powerless, which they were, to the powerful.
A shift in power the other way,
Right.
from the powerful to the
Powerless, right.
powerless.
And that's what happened, because there were so many people who joined the movement after Martin Luther King did the same thing. Did the same thing as Mahatma Gandhi. And if you know anything about history, Mahatma Gandhi had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on the Great Salt March and in many other marches. But he did not say to everybody, you must get arrested. He often told one of his compatriots, no, you go home. You go home. Don't get arrested. So there are people who are unable to, for physical health reasons, family reasons, that cannot get arrested. But I felt that I could, and that I wanted to make this statement that the justice system is unjust, and that we must make changes. We must resist in order to make changes. So my attorney, John McWilliam, said to the judge, I plead guilty and seek active jail time. And the district attorney said to the judge, Judge, Miss Zalph has been here many times before, and she's going to keep on doing it. But still, the judge said, I have never in 40 years sent somebody to jail for civil disobedience, second-degree civil disobedience. But if this is what you want, go next door. I won't do it. But the judge next door probably will. So we went next door, and I read my statement to the judge, and he said, okay, I commit you to 1 day in jail, less 21 minutes that you've spent in my courtroom. Are you ready to go now? And I said, yes, Your Honor, and I grabbed my bag, which had everything I needed in there, and the door was opened, and there was an officer there, and I followed him, and he took me downstairs to the paddy wagon. And there's where the very interesting part really begins, going to jail.
So did you feel that you had achieved a victory? And
I did. I did.
And you said you read a statement. What was the statement that you read?
Well, I read this, after they took me to the jail, they handcuffed me, put me in the paddy wagon, and took me to the jail, and I was turned over to a female officer who took all of my belongings, all of my clothes, and gave me the prison wardrobe and a receipt. And I was taken to a holding room, concrete bench, a toilet and a sink, and then I sat there for an hour, 2 hours. I was brought a bag of lunch, 2 slices of bread and a slab of peanut butter, and a plastic bag with water that I couldn't even open. And we hadn't any handcuffs at this point. And then I was taken to another holding room, and I stayed there for a couple of hours. Probably about 4 o'clock, they took me to the clinic. And I walked in to the prison clinic to find the male nurse listening to an inspirational speaker. He was going over my medical records, and a young Caucasian officer was quietly sitting in the room. The nurse asked about my medications and health, and I mentioned that I had 3 stitches in my lip and had trouble eating, and he pulled out a vanilla health drink with a straw that I could use. And I thought that was very sweet of him, very compassionate. And so I'm sitting there and talking, and I thought this is the perfect opportunity to ask if he knew why I was there. I mean, he knew my age, and I said, "Do you know why I'm here?" And he said, "No." And I read what I said to the judge about the evils of racism and voter suppression and my desire to go to jail, and the emotional energy in that room was palpable. You could feel that. And both the nurse and the other officer had tears welled up in their eyes when I told them why I was there. And they grabbed my hands, and we shook hands. And I felt that in some way they had believed that all white people didn't care a hoot about black people. And so what I said meant so much that he said, "You've changed my life. What you said changed my life. And I'm going to put you downstairs with the diabetics because they get their medicine early, so before their breakfast, because I see where you have to have your thyroid medication before you eat by several hours." And so I thanked him, and they took me down to the diabetic floor, which is a large area, almost half the size of a football field, and it's 2 stories, and I had a single room, and maybe, I don't know how the other young women had sleeping arrangements, whether they were in twos or in fours or singles, but they were all over the place and they were free walking around and talking. And so I walked over and was listening to a conversation and then decided I didn't care to be listening to people's political ideas and walked away.
You didn't care to listen to what?
Their political ideas, talking about, you know, how good Trump is.
Oh.
And I said,
These are people in prison?
in jail, one of them, one of the women.
The prisoners?
Yeah, yeah.
That's very interesting.
So I thought it was
Sad.
interesting, but I didn't want to get myself involved in talking about it, so I just walked away. And there were two women officers, there's all women downstairs here. And there was one who was wearing hijab, and African American, and so she was near a Latin guard, and I walked over there, and people are staring at me because they're people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and I'm 88, and they're looking at me, what's this old lady doing here? And so I was kind of talking to the two guards, and then I asked them if they knew why I was there. And they said, no, we don't know why you're here. And so I told them what my statement was. And they grabbed me and hugged me. And here again, it was an occasion that I wouldn't know what would happen. That here were two people, different, but both had experienced prejudice. And I said something to the Muslim guard. I imagine you felt prejudice in your days. And there was an affirmative nod from her. And at the end, I felt I had made a difference in 4 people's lives that day. And if chances come where I have another opportunity to show how I feel and make a difference in somebody's lives, I would do it again. It's a very, very good feeling to have, and you wouldn't know it unless you had it.
Ruth, that's a very moving story, and especially, yes, the most moving part is when you got into the jail and the response from 2 different times with some of the guards, which is a reminder to all of us. You know, I always would get uncomfortable when people in protests in the past would call the police pigs and things like that. That always just, even though there'd be people on, and I agree with everything else, there's something about that diminishing another person's humanity that I don't think helps the cause at all. You know, we're going to reach out to each other. So that was really beautiful.
Well, that's right.
You know,
You never help any cause by putting anybody down, because this was a source, a big reconciliation, a force for reconciling differences.
Yes. I'm getting we'll come back, Ruth. We're getting the message from Iris that it's time to take a station break, and we'll make a few announcements, and then we'll come back to Ruth, who's got these compelling stories that are so moving and reminder to all of us about no matter where another person you think is on the spectrum of your belief system, give it a chance, because you may be surprised. Thank you, Iris.
This is Wolf's Wake Up Call on WCOM LP, Chapel Hill and Carver, 103.5 FM. You can stream us live at WCOMFM.org.
Thank you. There's a couple of really important things coming up. Let's see. On Sunday, April 7th, it's the 110th anniversary of the founding of the NAACP and its fight against racial terror and lynching. And there's going to be, it's going to be open to the public, a celebration from 3 to 5 on Sunday, April 7th at the Southern Human Services Center on Homestead Road. So that's right down the same street from the Senior Center, for those of you who are not quite sure. And they're going to have a keynote speaker, is a very renowned person in our community, Irving Joyner. He's a North Carolina Central University law professor, and he's the North Carolina State NAACP's Legal Redress Chair. Additional speaker will be Theodore Shaw, the Julius Chambers Distinguished Professor of Law and Director of the UNC Center for Civil Rights. So this is going to be a very interesting celebration of the 110th anniversary of the founding of the NAACP. And if you want more information, James Williams, you can go to ATTWILL@will9@gmail.com. And it's being sponsored by the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition. So I encourage everybody to go to that. You want to say something about that, Ruth?
Interestingly enough, the NAACP was started by white people.
I thought it was both. I thought it was together,
Well,
whites and blacks together.
Well, there were blacks too, but I think the idea came up from a white community, and there were all of the African American community coalesced.
Well, it's been one of the things with the NAACP throughout its whole history has been that it is multiracial, and they have always been encouraging for white people to join, and it's one of the few organizations that has black and white working together. So it's pretty special, and it's had its ups and its downs, but it's going strong right now, especially when now Bishop William J. Barber became the state president about 4 or 5 years ago, and he really revitalized it, got it really doing a whole lot more, I think more than 4 or 5 years ago, because that's when he started the HK&J, the Historic
Oh, that's
Houses.
gone on for 11 years.
Yeah,
11
so
years with
somewhere in
HK&J.
there, he became the head of the state, and now he is a national figure with the Poor People's Campaign, which is what you were involved with when you got arrested. So that's going to be Sunday, April 7th. On the next day, on April 8th, at the Seymour Center, Wendell Potter will be talking about health care for all. He's a former executive of a health provider company who became a whistleblower of the industry. And he knows what it's like from the business end, and of how they tried to save money and what the profits were on our health care. So he's somebody who speaks from a businessman's point of view, which is very important to have. because a lot of times the critics of whenever you talk about health care for all or Medicare for all, the critics say, oh, it's a sweet idea, but you can't afford it. So we're having somebody talk who's been on the inside of how the insurance companies ran the business and what the business, he's I think in charge of those, in that of the business viewpoint. So that will be a very interesting program. That's at 6 to 8 o'clock, April 8th, that's Monday. So the 7th and the 8th, really important things to be able to go to, so mark your calendar. And now I want to get back to, and I just will mention that there's going to be a candlelight program on Rumi, the Persian poet. It's going to be at Unity Center of Peace, Thursday night and Friday night. The tickets are, I'm not sure, they're $15 or $20.
15.
15, and they have a quartet. There's going to be music and the wonderful poetry of Rumi, R-U-M-I, the Persian, well-known Persian poet, who's revered, and I forget how many centuries ago he lived, and his work is still beloved by many. So, okay, that's a lot of interesting and beautiful things to do. Now, our guest today is Ruth Zalph, who has just told us the story of her, not only her arrest, but her determination to be in the mode of other people to go to jail for her beliefs. And even though a judge was reluctant, she went and had some really moving experiences in the jail itself with some of the guards and people. So Ruth, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you were a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Your background?
Yep. I taught school in Florida for 27 years, and I started teaching first grade and then second grade, and then kept going to school myself, and then got a degree in corrective reading. And so I was working with children who had problems in reading K through 6 in the elementary school. And I was in an African-American neighborhood, and I felt that the children there needed so much, and yet they were not getting all that they needed. And I don't know, at that time, I wasn't that conscious of the differences in the amount of money different schools were getting and materials they were getting. And I know that working with kids K through 6, many of them would need a lot of help during not only K through 6, but going on further. And of course today, there's more pre-K work that people are trying to establish programs, because we find that children who are from poor families in poor areas, they get little money in their schools because everything is based on property tax. And so poverty is a great big reason why children don't have the same opportunity regardless of their age and their need. If they're in a wealthy neighborhood, those schools have current books, they have more teachers, they have art and music, and all of these things are critical in the growth of children.
So Ruth, early on you were very aware of injustice in your work as an educator, and to see that, because I don't think a lot of people realize that the poor districts, property taxes makes the determination, and there's some of our counties in this state that can barely get a teacher because a lot of them here can give a supplement to whatever the state gives. The state gives the same, but the wealthier counties give a supplement so they can pay the teachers so much more. And in some of those poor counties, it's so hard for them to get any teachers at all because they can't offer the same inducement or encouragement.
True.
So yeah, was that the beginning of your interest in social justice?
I think so. I think so, working with kids. It became very, very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from during those 27 years, I was raising 3 kids.
You were a working mom.
I was a working mom. Luckily, I had a husband who,
At least you
came
weren't a
home
single
and-
mom. That's the
and-
hardest.
right.
That's the hardest of all.
and
Yeah.
that's another part of poverty when you are a single mom
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to juggle how to get kids to where they need to be, how to get them home, how to feed them, how to do your shopping. I mean, there are so many things that you do as a single mom that you do not have to do when you have a
A
husband.
partner, yes.
And so, you know,
Share the load.
when I had a person come in and be with my kids when I was teaching 2 or 3 days a week. So what I did is, when they would call me, I would call my woman friend, and she would come. Sometimes she would bring her little boy, and so that would be good.
Mm-hmm.
She could be there with her little boy. When my kids were little, they were at home with her.
Mm-hmm.
When they started to go to school, it was a whole lot easier for me to
Mhm.
continue teaching.
Mm-hmm. So then, when did you get involved in working with other groups?
Well, most of that came in '86. My husband passed away in December of '86. Before that, when I said, I want to go and march with Martin Luther King, I want to go to Washington, my husband said, if you want to keep your job and family, you stay home, we send money. And so we sent money, and I stayed home. Today, it's so different. People bring their children
Mm-hmm.
with them, but that was not what people did back in the early '80s.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I really regret that I didn't go, but I don't know what the law was as far as teachers not being there.
Mm-hmm. Whether you get blacklisted or
Yeah.
it sounds like your husband was afraid that there would be repercussions.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid of sending money. That was fine.
Yeah.
Just stay home. Just, you know,
So then, after your husband passed, is when you got more in.
got very involved, and one of the big issues that I've always been committed to working on is the nuclear issue. And I remember when in Florida, we had a group that I belonged to, and we would go to every occasion where nuclear weapons or nuclear, well, one was Cassini. There was a space flight called Cassini, and instead of using solar power, they were using nuclear power, cesium something. And if there was an explosion, like there had been before, then all of the nuclear poison would come down in this section of Florida.
Oh my gosh.
And so we were all protesting the use of this nuclear material. And the authorities all said, well, if there's an explosion, you know, there had been that explosion of Does anybody remember which
Well, there's been different,
rocket going to the moon? Remember?
I can't remember exactly which, but there's been a few.
Well, this one of them, many of them have been successful, but there was an explosion of one, went down.
With the
That's all.
teacher, Ruth?
What?
With the teacher that was on it?
Might have been.
That was different, but I think there was some that were unmanned
See, I
that
was
had some explosions or
It's
didn't.
about 90,
Could have been.
yeah, something like that.
But the authorities just said, if there's an explosion and you see smoke, go indoors, put a wet cloth over your mouth and your nose, and you'll be okay. Well, we know better. And right now, our government is spending billions of dollars to make smaller nuclear weapons. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I was over there 2 years ago, and they've been protesting this for a long time. Much of the water there in Oak Ridge has been contaminated. There is a building where they used to produce nuclear parts, and it is so toxic that no one can even go in there all dressed up in outfits. No one can enter that building. And it just sits there.
Mm.
And I think that that is criminal. This country is not a poor country. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But how we spend our money is just pathetic.
Mm.
It's planning on war, planning on winning a war.
It's the war machine, and Eisenhower warned us way back then, not that anybody's paying any attention.
Right.
He warned us about what the military industrial,
Beware.
beware of it, and he had first put in congressional, and they took that out of his speech, so it wouldn't offend a lot of people. But why that's in there is they have been so slick and so smart, because they have all of these bomb making, war machine making factories all over the country, so that or they have air bases or stuff that is for the military, whether it's building the machinery or whether it's having a base. And so that provides jobs. So anytime they want to talk about, for budgetary reasons, maybe closing a few bases or closing a little this or that congressman will raise hell, because that's jobs in his area. So we have people all over the country won't let go of that war machine, and it's got a life of its own. It's taken some real courageous politicians, of which we're in short supply.
Well, the latest thing, of course, is we can employ all of the people who are in the military-industrial complex in jobs for energy,
Yeah,
producing energy,
solar.
solar energy, water energy,
It would be
wind
possible.
industry.
Yeah, it could.
It's a matter of retraining some people. We need to have a program that is free to retrain people who are in certain industries, the war-making industry, into an industry that is producing something for the good of the environment.
These could be pretty well-paying technical jobs, because it's not only producing the solar stuff, but it's installing it. And those are, the whole country needs solar installation. This could be jobs going on for years. and technically difficult enough jobs that they're gonna be well-paying jobs. And it's really interesting, I just heard this morning, Trump keeps making this thing about coal and the jobs in coal. Right now, there's more jobs in solar than there are in coal. Coal is a diminishing industry.
Right.
Solar is a growing industry, but somehow the powers that be don't wanna face up to that and put the money in there that needs to be put in there. So, yeah, there's things that could offer a lot of hope. But I wanna get back to you, so when you got involved in social justice work, it started out with the anti-nuclear campaign. And then it sounds like you've always long been interested in racial justice. And so that you start in one place and then you start seeing so many other things. So in '86 is when you started getting really involved.
Right. And then from the nuclear issue, during that time of the nuclear issue, I went to the Nevada test site where they tested weapons above ground. And I went on a peace walk in the Soviet Union and I went where they were testing, they had been testing
good for
nuclear
you.
weapons above ground too.
But did you go with a group to the Soviet Union?
Yes, it was a group of 200 Americans and 200 Soviets while the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And so we were in I'm blocking on the city where they test above ground.
Okay.
And every time we went to a different city, we had one of the Soviets and one of the Americans ask to speak. And when I was there, they asked me to come and speak. And I held up pictures of my two granddaughters, who were probably about 5 or 6 or 7, and I said, I would not send my children to your country to kill your children. And I held up their pictures. And my grandchildren are now 29 and 31. And the people there shouted and applauded, and there were a lot of children there. And there was a man on the stage, and he had one leg and one arm, and he was in utero at the time of the above-ground testing.
Oh.
This was Semipalatinsk, I just remembered.
It was
The
what?
name, Semipalatinsk. Semipalatinsk was the name
Of
of the city
Of the city.
in Kazakhstan. Semipalatinsk, and that's where they tested above ground.
Yeah.
And I have pictures of that.
So you've done a fair amount of traveling in regards to your social justice work. I know you've been to Cuba. You were at the Soviet Union. I didn't know about the Soviet Union. I know you've been to Cuba a couple times.
Right. Yeah, and
With
I
the
was
Fellowship for Reconciliation, I think you went with them.
and I went to Palestine, Israel.
I was just gonna say, you did go to Palestine, Israel. What year did you do that?
2015.
2015.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what group did you, what was your sponsoring group to go there? I just was wondering.
Interfaith Peace Builders.
Interfaith Peace Builder,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, they make several trips there
Uh-huh.
every year.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know whether they'd let me in again. We flew into Israel, and they were not very happy to see our group, and 2 of the members were not permitted in, and they had to go back. But they questioned me over and over and over again, about 5, 6, 7 minutes. They said, how are you going to get around? And I said, well, I think we'll have a bus taking us from place to place. And a Palestinian bus driver? I said, probably. He said, aren't you afraid? I said, I refuse to be intimidated.
So you've been leading a very, very fulfilling and interesting life, and with these trips abroad, and now you just recently had a trip into a jail. So and you know, you meet people in each of those places that you can relate to. I think that's so important for people who are afraid to move out of their comfort zone.
Well, I have to tell you regarding comfort zone, the jail at Wake County is much better than the jail in Washington. I spent the night in jail in Washington.
Okay.
Oh, that was terrible.
So that'd be interesting, somebody write up a tour book of the different jails, what are the amenities here or there? Where do I choose to get arrested at?
But, you know, I've enjoyed taking trips to Colombia with Witness for Peace.
Oh, so you went to Colombia too?
With Witness for Peace.
That's where I went with them. What year did you go?
Oh, I don't remember.
And
I went to another country.
you know, Colombia's heating up again
I
now
know.
after them having somebody in charge who was trying to have some peace with FARC, and now there's some
Yeah.
right-wing guy in there trying to get it all stirred up again. It's so sad. So
It
sad.
is.
3 minutes.
We're running close to our time. Did we get in everything you wanted to talk about, Ruth? You had given me a list of questions,
sure.
but I think it was all really about this recent arrest was the main thing. And your decision to want to ask for jail time instead of community service.
There's one other thing that I'd like to mention, the importance of my work with Habitat for Humanity, the old Habitat for Humanity. And I did a lot of trips abroad with them
Oh, really?
and worked with Jimmy Carter in Miami.
Oh,
And
I'm
I
glad you
worked-
didn't leave that out. That's
I
exciting.
worked with Jimmy
That's
Carter
amazing.
in Mexico, in Tijuana,
Oh, my gosh.
and he and Rosalind, and that was
One of the best of
wonderful.
our ex-presidents.
Oh, he is,
He's hard to beat.
yeah.
He's
I
wonderful.
respect he and Rosalind so much,
Yeah.
and I'd love to go and visit Georgia and visit the Carter Center, which I have not done.
Yeah. I don't know how, I think most people realize that he has devoted himself to mediation with different
Yeah.
conflicting situations. They also check if they're invited, when there's voting, to verify if it was fair.
Right,
So he can give his stamp of approval.
right.
And when Hamas was voted in Gaza, that he was there, and that vote was very fair. And what's caused so much heartache and pain and suffering and killing since then is that our government couldn't stand it. You know, we believe in voting as long as you vote for who we want you to vote for. And they did not vote for who we wanted them to vote for, and we've been making their life hell ever since. So Jimmy Carter, yeah, well, good for you.
Yeah, it was a highlight for
Yeah,
me working with him,
I bet.
and I went to many places. I went to
Mexico was one, you said.
yeah.
Georgia, did you go in? with them in Georgia? Well, we've only got another minute. I'm glad we got in about your work with Jimmy Carter, because that's such a positive thing, with all the painful things injustice things that you try to stand up for, this building homes for people is such a positive, and that's what, a lot of our energy, it looks like with these young people now in the House of Representatives, some of that energy is gonna go into some positive initiatives. I hope so.
I'm not gonna be here forever.
No, and Wendell Carter is gonna be on healthcare for all. That's what there's now. It's coming back to be talked about and seeing if it can't work out. And the NAACP on Sunday the 7th, 3 to 5, celebrating their anniversary. So, well, Ruth, I'm so glad that you came. And I knew a lot about you, but I learned a lot today. I didn't know that you had taken that many trips, so that's great. Good for you. And I'm sure there's many more trips ahead for you.
I hope so.
Yeah, it looks like you're...
I hope conditions improve, that the trips will be different kinds of trips.
Yes.
Trips of joy.
I'll never forget when the Fellowship for Reconciliation came for that potluck at the Church of Reconciliation. And you had not planned to go, and they said there was room on the bus, and you said, I'll go home and pack my bag, and you went home and jumped on the bus and off you went.
That was cute.
I just said, oh my God, she's doing
wonderful. That was wonderful.
Good for you, Ruth, good for you. May your spirit live on and inspire all of us. Keep us all going.
You do a good job.